He did it a few days ago, and I'm finally able to make a video about it. But he's back, and he's running for president again. And I really like his campaign ad because he talked about all the different issues that we as normal Americans are facing today, and a lot of what he was pushing and running on last time in 2016. A lot of that's pretty much the same, so all that's pretty good stuff. And the best thing about Bernie's campaign ad is that it was mostly about policy. It went policy after policy after policy. There's one thing the ad mentions is Medicare for all. He's the one that really pushed that we, the American people, need just free health care, just Medicare for all. Instead of just waiting for everybody to get 65, then they get covered pretty much no holds barred. He says, no, we need everybody to be covered. And it's the great thing about it is that it's a simple program or a simple change. What they do, what the legislators could do is just say, okay, this is the new Medicare for all bill. All we're going to do is change the age limit to no age limit. From the time you're born to the time you die, you're covered under Medicare. Of course, there are a few flaws with Medicare, but the biggest thing is we just need to put more money into the Medicare system, and then it's an easy way to cover everybody, no problems. Not to mention that every other developed nation and every other wealthy nation has a Medicare for all system or single payer system. So there's really no good reason for us to not have Medicare for all, unless, of course, our government's corrupt. And he does talk about how our campaign finance system's corrupt, and that's a lot of the reasons why we can't get all the policies that we the people need or we the people want, is because of that corruption. And then he also talks about free college tuition, that anybody that wants education, they need to be able to get one and not suffer under just enormous amounts of debt, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe $100,000. And that's the one debt that, since you can't get rid of through bankruptcy, it could be one of the most important debt you go into. And the ad also goes into some of his accomplishments he made throughout the past 4 years, especially getting Amazon to pay their lowest wage workers a $15 wage, and getting Walt Disney, the Disney company, to pay their lowest wage workers a higher income. So those are two massive victories for him and for the people, because we need higher wages to make sure that our needs are covered. And big business is trying to make sure that we don't get the income and the wages that we have earned. So personally, that's why I think we need to go to a more socialist system, or a socialist system, period, and just scrap capitalism, because it's always going to be this fight between us, the people and the workers, and the capitalists. And under our capitalistic system, that fight's never going to go away. And we're always going to struggle on trying to make sure that everybody gets a good wage. But one thing that Bernie really needs to really campaign on is actually steal Tulsi Gabbard's from Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, is we really need to fight all these interventionist wars, because we do not need to be trying to overthrow other governments just to steal their resources, because it's inhumane and destructive, and it just causes havoc and death and destruction all across the world. It doesn't benefit us, we the people, and it definitely doesn't benefit the people that live in those nations. So Bernie Sanders really needs to say, you know what, Tulsi Gabbard is right. We need Medicare. Well, he should say, we need Medicare for all. We need to make sure that people aren't dying in the streets because they're poor or they're older and they have health care needs. This is the wealthiest nation in the world. We definitely have the money to be able to cover every single person that lives in the U.S. No problem. So this is what the people need, is Medicare for all. And he also needs to say, Tulsi Gabbard's right. We need to stop these interventionist wars. Because overthrowing governments to steal the resources doesn't help the people here, and it definitely doesn't help the people that live in those nations. We could show them love by making sure our government isn't trying to overthrow their governments and kill them just for their own selfish gains. And I do like that Tulsi Gabbard is running on a hardline message of we need to stop these interventionist wars because it doesn't benefit the people. But she also needs to talk about some domestic issues that she needs to implement, because what else is she gonna do besides stop our war machine? So I would like to vote for one of them in the presidential primaries or the Democratic primaries, but as of now, I can't really go for either of them because Tulsi needs to expand her campaign message. Bernie really needs to add the anti-war stance, anti-war policies to his docket. So, not to mention that the other biggest thing, or the other biggest reason why I wouldn't vote for either of them is because the Democratic Party is gonna commit election fraud again and cheat and do every single thing they can to rig each and every single primary to make sure that Kamala Harris or someone else wins it over Bernie or Tulsi. So, and that's also why I can't give them any money either, because I'd send them both like $30, something like that. But since I know the DNC is gonna cheat them both and take that money for them and use it to pay some shitty consultants and their damn lobbyists, yeah, I can't really do it. Also, another big thing is I'll get behind Bernie after they cheat him again, or they cheat Tulsi, and whoever is ahead says, you know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break the Democratic Party because they've cheated me, or they've cheated me twice in Bernie's case by committing election fraud, doing all these illicit and illegal things to make sure that people can't vote, or they're kicking people off voter rolls, and they're shutting down polling places, etc., etc. All that is undermining our democracy and our election integrity, and we're not going to have it. That's why I'm going to continue and run as independent, or run as a Green Party candidate. You know, we're going to break the Democratic Party on the way to winning the White House. Let's get it. That's what I'm waiting for. So, till Bernie or Tulsi, one of them does that, I'm really not going to vote for them or give them any money for their campaign. Because now I'm a hardliner. I voted for Jill Stein in 2016. Wanted to vote for, it's kind of feeling the itch to vote for Jill Stein in the Green Party in 2012. But I didn't really hear nothing about any independent party in the 2012 election, because if you remember, it's all about, oh my gosh, the Affordable Care Act still hasn't been implemented yet. If you vote for Mitt Romney, maybe he's going to gut it, because the Republicans have been talking about gutting it. So it's definitely a vote of the lesser two evils back in 2012. But it's hard to say Romney would have killed the Affordable Care Act, because that was his proposal when he was governor of Maryland, was fucking Heritage Foundation right-winger idea for healthcare. So I do need to reiterate that I'm not looking for a perfect candidate. I just need a candidate that's really going to say that, at the very least, that both parties are corrupt in one way, or maybe the most important way to ensure that we get policies is to fight both of those parties. Because both of those parties are working to make sure that you don't get your say in the policies you want. And the other thing is we need to get rid of our interventionist war machine. We're spending money on death and destruction a hell of a lot more than we're spending money on making sure people have a house, food, education, clean water, because Flint still doesn't have a clean water, transportation, etc., etc., their basic needs. So I am feeling the burn, but can't vote for him yet. Just can't do it. Not to mention that it's 2019 and primaries don't start till sometime next year. Well, till sometime in, was it March? It's February or March of 2020 when Iowa caucus starts. So each campaign's got a long ass road ahead of them. Actually, we're running out of time, but earlier, because I'm shooting this later in the day, but one other story I needed to talk about is Colin Kaepernick actually beat the NFL. And actually, since Colin Kaepernick has started protesting and the team wouldn't sign him last season, actually my brother, he was protesting the NFL by not watching the games. And last year I mentally wasn't ready, so I was like, whoa, that's a little extreme to not watch any NFL games just because of Colin Kaepernick's protesting police brutality. But after I read some news articles, thought about it, I was like, you know what? Sean King, he just happened to write a good article about how our dignity and self-respect is a lot more important than entertainment. So I was like, well, you know what? He's right. So I could also be in the league and not watch any games as long as at least as long as the protest was going to keep going on. So I think my brother, he ended it for the 18th season, but I started it for the 17 off season. Well, for the 17-18 off season, and I didn't watch pretty much any of the NFL games for 2018 season. I watched a little bit of highlights on YouTube, but it wasn't really that much at all, especially compared to what I was watching before. And it was actually really beneficial for me personally to really shift my focus and shift my priorities around, because it was actually really not a good way how I was going about watching NFL games. But throughout the whole regular season, I might have watched maybe half of a game throughout all those weeks. And I think it was really less than that. Throughout the playoffs, I really didn't watch any of the playoff games at all either. So I was doing pretty good. At first I was surprised at how well I was doing, but as it went on, I was like, you know what, after I mentally shifted my focus to focus on other things besides watching NFL games, it became easier. So, and him not being as big a deal as I thought. And for the Super Bowl, I only watched about like 3 plays of it when it was live, and that was it. And then I watched the highlights of the Super Bowl after that. And then sometime during the season, I did see the article pop up about how Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed filed a collusion case against the league. And I was really happy to see that, because if any of you, or if a lot of you don't know, all the major sports leagues in the United States, the players and owners for all the sports leagues, they have collective bargaining agreements. And that sets the rules for what the owners could do, what the players could do, and how they're going to split the revenue up. It's a pretty good system, especially for the players, because if the players didn't have a union to organize them into one group, the owners would just run roughshod on them and really take a lot more of the revenue and the profits than if they didn't have one. So we, the people, the United States, need to look at the players' leagues and the players' unions and say, you know what? If wealthy sports players have unions, then just regular working Joes and working Janes need unions to organize and make sure they get good wages too. But let's get on with the article. This is from the Atlantic. And technically, Colin Kaepernick withdrew his collusion case. Technically, the NFL did not admit that it conspired to blackball Kaepernick from the league after he began taking a knee during the national anthem to protest racial injustice. But non-technically speaking, the NFL lost massively. The terms of the settlement announced on Friday were not disclosed. But it doesn't matter how much money Kaepernick ultimately receives from the NFL. What matters is that he bested a league that has a long history of pummeling its opposition in court, especially players. In a way, the NFL had no other choice. Last August, arbitrator Stephen Burbank rejected the NFL's request to have the case dismissed. That meant he believed Kaepernick's team had compiled enough receipts to present their case. With another hearing reportedly scheduled for next month, did the NFL really want to let Kaepernick's legal team expose those receipts in court? Of course not. Owners and coaches had already given depositions in Kaepernick's case, and the details that emerged from those proceedings did not look good for the NFL. And then the article goes on about how President Donald Trump, he really wanted to criticize the players that protested against racial injustice, and then it goes on about how the NFL owners just backed off and just let Trump just kind of bitch slap him in a way. Then it talks about how some people are criticizing Colin Kaepernick for settling, because if the league really felt that they're going to get beat in court, people would say, well, Kaepernick really should have pushed the envelope and really broke them in court. And I'll take the win, but it would have been pretty damn sweet to see him just say, you know what, fuck that, I'm gonna take you guys to court and I'm gonna beat you over the head with this shit. I'm gonna expose all your dirty ass laundry for all the bullshit you guys been doing just to placate to these racist ass fans that you guys got. So it is disappointing that they settled for me, but the most important thing is that Kaepernick did win. Then I'll continue down later in the article. That Kaepernick was the one to make the NFL eat crow is a special kind of karma. This is just punishment because the league incompetently handled the player protests, starting with Kaepernick's from the beginning. Had the league not been so heavy-handed in policing the protests, this issue likely would have abated sooner. Had the league ignored Trump instead of cowering to his bullying, appeasing Trump wouldn't have become a priority. Had one league owner had the guts to sign Kaepernick, this collusion case would have been a non-starter, including my team, the Green Bay Packers. I've been a Packers fan since I was 10 years old. I'm actually a Packers owner too, so I was actually really disappointed that a few weeks after Aaron Rodgers got hurt, I believe this was in 2016. It might have been 2017. I think it was 2017. A few weeks after Aaron Rodgers got hurt, and it's looking like Brett Hundley was like okay, and they should sign Colin Kaepernick. They really should have done it. So yeah, my Packers definitely ain't an innocent party in here either. But too often, the NFL has shown an embarrassing commitment to being on the wrong side of history for the sake of profits. The league settled a $1 billion class action concussion lawsuit brought by former players, but in the process, the NFL wasted a lot of time looking absolutely foolish, denying its culpability. And regardless of the money it spent trying to make the issue go away, concussion and head trauma still haven't disappeared from the public consciousness. Then another safety issue to kind of tack on to the NFL being hypocritical about them trying to be about player safety and all that. Think about 2 years ago, one of the NFL analysts, it was probably NFL Network, but they talked about how a lot of rugby players, they never really get concussions, or I shouldn't say that, but they don't get nearly as many concussions as NFL players do. It's because rugby players, they don't use any pads at all, and they don't have a helmet. So since the players don't have a helmet, they're not hitting each other with their heads. So therefore, they don't really have that big of a concussion issue. And I watched a rugby match a few months ago, and it wasn't as entertaining as football, but it's definitely physical. So if anybody watches a rugby game, you can't sit there and say, "Oh, well, they're not really hitting, and they're only kind of just playing half-speed football." No, they're playing rugby, and they're getting after each other, trying to hit each other and score some points. So it's not just it's going to turn into the NBA where they're only going to play half speed and it's going to be a shitty game and shitty entertainment because they're not putting forth at least 80% or 90% effort all the time. I don't remember if the analyst said to remove shoulder pads and helmets, but I think that's what the NFL should do, is say, you know what, we're going to change the game to make it safer. No shoulder pads or helmets at all. Just the soft padding underneath the jerseys, and the guys can still kind of play the same. You can't hit each other with the heads, but you can still go out, tackle each other, and then they need to get rid of even though the quarterback's the most important position, you can't hit them hard. Because part of the imbalance of football that's going on right now is because of them emphasizing safety. They're trying to say that you can't hit the quarterback hard, and that really takes away the defensive aspect of the game that makes football more entertaining sport than basketball. Is because basketball is mostly an offensive game, and the NFL used to be more of a balanced game where offense, defense, and special teams is what got you to win games. It's not just who has the better offense and that's it. It's going to determine who's going to win the game. So if they actually let players hit the quarterback hard, yeah, it'll take some safety out. But if they take out shoulder pads and helmets, the concussion issue will really go away, because you really can't hit anybody with your head if you don't have a helmet on. Alright, it's actually been a few days. I got sick like the day after I shot one other section of this video. So of course it's coming out later than I wanted to, but sometimes that's just life and shit just happens. But the last section of my video I wanted to talk about was Venezuela, because they're really important in the news right now, because our government is trying to overthrow their president, Nicolas Maduro. Of course, the U.S. Reasons or excuses to try to go in to Venezuela and try to overthrow him are just completely hypocritical and just outrageous, because they want to talk about giving them democracy when, of course, our democracy is pretty shitty and just full of contradictions and problems and issues and corruption. Corruption is probably the biggest thing that we're dealing with here in the United States. because our government can't even make sure that black people could vote with no issues at all, among other big issues. But when I was digging into the Venezuelan story, I did find out that the U.S. government actually did try to overthrow them previously in 2002. And that was when Hugo Chavez was the president, and he got elected back then. So for whatever reason, well, we know the reason, but the United States want to overthrow the Venezuelan government back then. They were not able to. They're unsuccessful back then. And that was really good. That's critical for Latin America to not just be a convenient tool for the U.S. government. And it just showed that other governments have power. The United States doesn't have just complete control of every other government, any other government, no matter what pressure they try to put on those that government or that specific president. But even though our government tries to explain that the people in Venezuela need democracy, going in and overthrowing a government isn't very democratic at all, number one. And number two is a lot of these presidents were voted in by the people for that recent election. So that's reason number two why, the reasons why our government is are trying to use coups to overthrow these presidents is just completely illegitimate and illegal. And you could really call these war crimes. So if we actually get a representative government and a president that wants to represent the people of the United States, this president, whether it's Bernie Sanders or some future president, could actually go back and say, you know what, we're going to charge all these previous presidents and all these previous administrations for illegally starting coups and try to overthrow governments and try to commit war crimes on a mass scale. So it's not just the people of Venezuela that need this, but the people of the United States need this, because our government trying to overthrow Nicolas Maduro is not going to help the people of the United States. And what they're trying to help, or who they're trying to help, is right here in this article from commondreams.org. This article is from February the 12th, so it's a couple weeks old. But that's okay. Now I'll just start from the top right here. Since 1998, the United States of America has tried to overthrow the government of Venezuela. What threatened the government of the United States since then was the Bolivarian dynamic set in motion by the election of Hugo Chavez as president of Venezuela that year. Chavez won the elections with a mandate from Venezuela workers and poor to overhaul the country to tend to their long-neglected needs. Venezuela, with the world's largest proven oil reserves, have enriched the U.S.-based oil companies and its own oligarchy. I'll skip a line or two right here. Chavez arrived as the embodiment of popular hope. He threatened the oil companies and the oligarchy, which is why the United States tried to overthrow him. So since Hugo Chavez wanted to use crude oil to help his own people, no. The United States and those big oil companies could not have that. And of course, the private companies of Venezuela, they couldn't have that either. So they wanted to overthrow him, but they were not able to. And then here we go. About 17 years later, it's the same thing. Nicolas Maduro, he's trying to use the oil revenues and make sure he helps out the poor and the working class people in Venezuela. Of course, the Trump administration, no, we can't have that. And it's also because of he's pushing more of a socialist type of government, where the government's going to provide plenty of different services for the people, so they can have better lives. And that's a threat to the U.S. government, because if we, the people, start forcing our hand to have a more of a socialist government that's actually going to provide for us all the things that we need, like housing, healthcare, education, transportation, all those wealthy plutocrats and oligarchs, well, they're going to lose a lot of money and they're going to lose a lot of status if we could demand that. Really crack down on all their illegitimate profits and the illegitimate gains and income that they've brought in since the economic collapse of 2008. While the working class and the poor people in the United States since 2008 haven't really got a income boost at all. And also what happened is last month our State Department gave Juan Guaido, this random ass guy in Venezuela, he proclaimed himself to be the president, and our State Department gave him the Venezuelan bank accounts. So they're just completely trying to undermine the sovereignty of Venezuela so they could try to install a puppet president to make sure that they could take all the wealth from Venezuela. But like I said earlier, it's working fairly poorly right now, so hopefully our government doesn't go in and do an actual military invasion, because they're trying to coax the Venezuelan military to overthrow Nicolas Maduro, and so far the military's not doing that either. So far it's looking good for Venezuela, and hopefully our government doesn't go in with our military to overthrow them, because that'd just be a fucking disaster and another war crime that our government's committed.